how I did the mock draft last Thursday with Daniel Jeremiah, a former three-time scout in the NFL.
Yes.
And when I did my mock draft, I had Kyle Pitts, the tight end, at number 2.
You did?
And there was this sense I got mocked for it. Like, oh, you... And I said, if Trevor Lawrence wasn't in the draft, I would take Kyle Pitts number 1. He's the best player easily in the draft. So an NFL scout came out yesterday, anonymously, because nobody wants to talk about the players before their team.
Sure.
He said, I've never seen anything like Kyle Pitts. He goes, after Trevor Lawrence, that's the guy you draft second in the draft. Now, it's interesting because I should have majored in college in sociology instead of broadcasting because I love watching people's behavior. And I have a belief, this is my belief, that most people are more talented than their current job, but that fear drives everybody. Your fear of failure, your fear of leaving home, your fear of being mocked, that drives every decision. And most people are driven by fear. Even tough guys at the gym, they never move out of their hometown. They don't want to go for it. They don't want to fail. They're comfortable at home. And that fear of missing out, they talk about FOMO, young kids, fear of missing out, not being at the cool parties. Fear drives everything. And Bill Belichick, because of all his Super Bowls, doesn't draft out of fear. Now, he struggles with drafting, but he drafted a kicker. There's always been this saying, can't draft a kicker. Well, Belichick, believe it or not, is smarter than you, guy listening right now on your Reddit account. He drafted a kicker, Stephen Gostkowski. He made the all-decade team and 4 or 5 Pro Bowls and was the leading scorer for them. You can draft a kicker. They'll be the leading scorer on your football team. Think about any other sport. The leading scorer. Well, you can't draft a leading scorer. You can't draft a kicker? Belichick's the best coach ever. He did. Of course you could draft a kicker. But people don't do it because the fear of being mocked. Kyle Pitts is so good that the scouts I talk to say that not only will he be the best tight end on your football team, that barring 4 or 5 teams, he'd be the best receiver on your football team, rookie year in the NFL. Now, there's obviously he's not as good as Devontae Adams right now in Green Bay or DeAndre Hopkins in Arizona. I mean, there's a handful of receivers he's not better than. Mike Evans maybe at Tampa. But that the fact he'll be the best tight end in the league by his first or second year. And by the way, tight ends have never meant more. Travis Kelce last year was second in receiving yards in the league as a tight end. But this idea that you would box yourself in and not be able to draft a tight end first or second is stupid. Why are you... The only reason you wouldn't is fear of being mocked. Years ago, Chris Ballard, a great GM for the Colts, drafted a guard like 5th or 6th. And I know Ballard, and I remember talking to him about it. And he's like, Colin, he's the only player in this draft that is guaranteed to be a Hall of Famer. I don't care what position he plays. He goes, a third of this first round is going to whiff. Half of the first round will underachieve. He's the only guy that you're like, oh, it's a Hall of Famer. Like Tyron Smith, when the Cowboys drafted him out of USC, it was every scout I talked to was like, oh, he is a Hall of Famer. He was just like, you get about one of these a draft. You get maybe one a draft. Patrick Willis, when the 49ers drafted him out of Ole Miss. I can remember talking to, I said this on the air at ESPN. They're like, he's the best player in the draft. He's the only can't miss in the draft as long as he doesn't get hurt. Like, I don't care about labels that I can't do. If Trevor Lawrence isn't in this draft, he is the only guaranteed star. Kyle Wilson's not a guaranteed star. He's never beaten a top 20 program in college. This kid played against Patrick Surtain, who's the first or second best corner in the country for Alabama. Ate him up. Okay? He's going to walk into this league and tear it up as a rookie. Take out 5 or 6 teams. He'll be your best wide receiver. Stop living in these tunnels and these boxes, and you can't. And you can draft a kicker. You can draft a tight end number 1. You can draft a guard top 5 or 6. And that Cowboy offensive line was a bunch of centers and guards and tackles, all first round. It's not just the quarterback pass rusher league. You get a great... How many teams in the NFL, because when you have a quarterback, don't need a great... I mean, the Seattle Seahawks right now, their number 1 need is a left guard. If you had Quentin Nelson available and you had the 4th pick for Seattle, you're going to go get a corner?
Well, that's always the balance of the draft. Do you take the best player that's available, or do you take what you need?
Well,
and
when
if
the player
need
is
a quarterback, then you've got to take a quarterback, which is why they go high in the draft. If you don't, you should absolutely take the most talented player. This is a conversation with Chase Young. Chase Young, we know what Chase Young is going to be
Just
great
draft him
immediately.
By the way,
but if you need a quarterback, you can't take Chase Young.
Well, if you need a quarterback. So quarterback's the exception. But
Right.
Washington already had a great defensive front. And they were like, no, Chase Young is obviously the best player in the draft.
And they were right.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he's a monster.
And if you don't have a transcendent talent like Trevor Lawrence, or you don't have someone like Joe Burrow, then yeah, you should take the most talented player in the draft. Whatever position that
Kyle
is.
Pitts doesn't even look like other players. I mean, scouts are now saying, oh, he'll be the best receiver on your team. I watched about 4 Florida games this year. They lined him up everywhere. They lined him up in the slot. They lined him up. Alabama couldn't stop him. He had like 7 catches, 120 yards.